This is a reverse bear trap from the movie Saw. This is the first reverse bear trap I ever made, so far the only one, and I'm exceedingly proud of it because it was probably one of the most complicated 3D prints that I've ever done, but it's not perfect, and there are many, many, many flaws with this. I mean, it's functional insofar as the gearing work, moves around, locks in place, and so on, but there's just a million tiny little things about it that as I was making this, I just knew I could improve on. First of which is this is just too darn big. For my noggin here, I'm actually going to be having a video come out that's going to require me to wear one of these for a fairly extended period of time. So that's actually going to be something that I need to get this fitted properly. And as it is, to get it to the right mouth point, I have this big gap up here. The file that I bought and downloaded the plans for to print this out was much smaller than this, and it recommended blowing it up. And this is at 250% scale size from the 3D model I downloaded. And I'm going to go ahead and include a link to the file down below if you want to go ahead and purchase it. The creator of this was just fantastically talented, and the reproduction of this was incredible. So yeah, feel free to go ahead and check that out if you want. This is a 200%. That was 250. This is 200. And for this one, it's just a little bit too small. If you want to find out what exactly the right size is for you once you download the file and print it out, the headband part of this is probably the biggest key indicator of that, because once you print this out, you can kind of tell because these two holes are going to be where the upper and lower jaw pin in. And ideally, you'd like to have this middle point right here matching your mouth so that this upper jaw hole here matches your upper jaw and this lower jaw hole comfortably on the lower jaw. And this one, it's just too small. So I'm going to go ahead and Goldilocks this and go at 225%, see how that does. And all the little mistakes that I knew I was making as I was going through this with the slicing and the cutting and the doweling and the printing and the sanding and the priming and the painting and every stage of this that I knew I could be improving, I'm going to go ahead and apply those thoughts and try to walk through this, not the least of which is the mistake I made of making that entire first one without recording any of the process. So that's the biggest mistake I'm going to correct right now. I'm going to walk you through this step by step. If you want to follow along, all the links to all the products and paints and so forth that I'm going to be using are in the description below. Let's go ahead and make ourselves a reverse bear trap. At 225%, there were several objects that were too large for my bed. The headband, the upper jaw, the lower jaw, and the long pipe all needed to be cut down, doweled, and then assembled later. Extensive use of tree supports became necessary with many of these prints. So many of these parts had very odd angles, shapes, and overhangs. This is definitely not something that was designed with a 3D printer in mind.
So here are all the parts that I printed for the reverse bear trap from the movie Saw. Now I'm not going to glue all these together right away. What I'm going to do is focus specifically right now on the parts that I had to cut and split to fit on the bed of my 3D printer. I do not have a helmet size 3D printer. It's a fairly big one, but even so, to accommodate the 225%, I did have to cut some of them down. If it was just 200%, as you can see from this smaller print that does not fit my noggin, this actually did fit perfectly on the bed, but taking a look at here, it's just too big and I couldn't do it. So I had to split it, cut it, and make some dowels in the 3D modeling, in the slicing software to make it happen. So that's what I did, and that's what I'm going to go ahead and put together now. After I'm done with that, I'm going to go ahead and do some primer on all of it, then assemble it, then do the final painting stuff. So what I'm going to be using to do the gluing together is the best stuff that I found for adhering PLA filament together, which is this stuff here, which is SciGrip from IPS. It's a Smarter Adhesive Solutions Fast Set 16 clear medium bodied solvent cement. This is pretty nasty stuff, but it does the trick like nothing I've ever seen before. So this is important. We're going to go ahead and use some respiration equipment and some PPE for this job. So I'm going to glove up, I'm going to mask up, I'm going to eyeball up, and then I'm going to glue up. So here we go.
Now when I did the doweling, I specifically did it so that each side has slightly different spacing to it, so that I knew exactly which part went where and in which orientation. That's why there's two close together and one far apart there, is so that I know exactly which way everything goes. And that kind of follows suit with a lot of different aspects here. Like this one here has one smaller dowel. I specifically did that so that I knew which orientation that would go in. Now another thing I'm going to go ahead and do right now is I'm going to add these pins to that, or will I? That's actually a good question. So here's the pros and cons, is if I do it now, I'm going to have better adhesion at the contact point with the PLA than if a base of primer was on it. The downside to it is it's a lot easier for the primer and the paint that I'm going to do later to get in these various nooks and crannies without this pin in the way. You know what? No, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to primer it all first. So I'm going to go ahead and let all of this dry, and then I'm going to do a nice coat of matte black Fusion All-in-One paint and primer. So this is going to give everything a really nice matte black coat. Now, you may be asking at this point, why did I not print this in black filament like I did these right here? Because I have black filament. The fact is, I just generally like the way that the matte primer looks against the white. And the more layering of colors that I do, the better it's going to turn out. So that's generally, here I can take the mask off at this point. That's generally the idea. I mean, eventually, this is not the only primer I'm going to use. The Metal Effect paint that I'm going to be using has its own special primer, which is brown right here, and that's going to go on top of everything else. I don't have a spray for this, so I might try to use the airbrush. Last time I did it, I just did it with a brush, and that took a long while, but so I might airbrush it, but you know, we'll just have to see how it goes. But yeah, I mean, we're going to start with the base of white, then we're going to go with black primer, then we're going to go with brown primer, then we're going to do
the metal effect paint, and then we'll do the activation and then the sealing. It's just going to be layer upon layer upon layer to achieve that simulated rusty metal look that we want. But that's why these pieces here I did print in black filament. These are the pieces that are going to go on here that goes inside the mouth. And I have found that while wearing it, it actually kind of is important to have that. It's uncomfortable as all get out, but you know, doing it in the right way kind of helps it from not poking into your mouth too awful much. But even so, it being inside your mouth, I did want these to be the only unpainted surface. So these are going to be waiting for very last and going in once everything else is done, and hopefully I can get some good adhesion on there. So yeah, so I'll have just unpainted, non-chemically filament on the pieces that are going into my mouth. But otherwise, if you don't actually have that piece, then it just tends to wobble around on your head while you're trying to wear it. So yeah, having that in your mouth really does kind of help stabilize it while you're wearing it. So that should about do it. Yeah, I will go ahead and primer it, and we'll be back when that's all set, and these are all matte black. All the pieces here have now had its base primer coat, and so tried to do a fairly even all over coat. And now we're going to get to the point where before assembly I want to do the primer coat of the metal effects. So let me just walk you through that. So this is the good stuff right here. This is Modern Masters Metal Effects Oxidizing Iron Paint. This is going to give it a true rusty look. But in order to do this, this is actually paint that's infused with iron shavings and iron elements, and it needs to be activated with copper salts. So before this gets applied, first we do the special primer that is meant for this metal effects system here. Then we apply the paint. Then we activate it with the copper salts metal rust activator. And then the optional step, which I am going to do, is protect it with this Permacoat Extreme Seal and Protect. It basically stops the rusting process, gives it a little bit of a darker color, which some people may not like, but for me, it's worth it to have this coated and protected. So, especially considering this is going on my noggin. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. But first, what I'm going to do is the primer. I'm going to try, I don't know how well this is going to work, but I'm going to try to do a thin coat of it in my airbrush and see how that goes. The first reverse bear trap I made, I did a brush coat, and this time I'm going to try airbrush. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, then I'll go back to the brush. Once everything has its full coat of primer and is ready for the actual iron paint, then before this step I'm going to go ahead and do the assembly and glue all the parts in place and get it set up so that I can do a brush all over with the iron paint once it's fully assembled. So that's the plan, and let's see how this goes. Yeah, pretty pleased with that overall. Has a nice kind of a soft effect on it with the black primer still kind of showing through. I like that a lot better than the brushed on look. So I'm going to keep going with all these parts here. Check back with me in about 5 years. Base primer of the matte black is done. Base primer of the Metal Effects brown is also done with the airbrush. It took a little while, had some splattering issues, had some thinning issues, but overall I'm really pleased with this effect. The primer is set, everything's dry, and I really love the way that the black is still kind of showing up beneath the brown. I think that's going to add some real depth to it, and at this point I kind of want to go with assembly. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and work on now. Here we go. It is assembled. I let it go overnight. I had a few issues after the camera was turned off of some pieces breaking off, and it was indeed the adhesive melting the primer as opposed to the filament. But I just kept at it, and after an overnight, this honestly, this part right here, where it attaches this piece to this piece, as well as this piece down here, it has only one little attachment on the corner here. That's the most fragile part, and that's the part that was the most headache inducing. But now I am very cautious about doing this, but it seems to have held, and everything else seems like it's in good shape. So I am ready to go ahead and start painting. So now I'm going to go ahead and use the Modern Masters Metal Effects Oxidizing Iron Paint. This stuff is a nightmare to get homogeneous. The amount of shaking that must be done, and honestly,
the metal filings, the iron shavings, all settle to the bottom, and you really kind of have to get something in there that, like a long rod or something like that, and just scrape it. You got to scrape away at it. It really takes some muscle, and I've already kind of done a lot of that ahead of time here. So I'm just going to give it a little more of a shake, and you cannot at all, no matter how much you try and thin it out, you cannot use an airbrush for this. It is simply just not possible. The iron filings that are in this, it's sludge. It's absolute sludge. And those filings will clog your airbrush. I don't care if you get it to like a 20-to-1 ratio with thinner, it's going to clog your airbrush on the first hit. So it's brush time, and we're just going to go ahead and get started. And we're just going to go ahead and try to do as much as possible of a light, even coating. Now you can see, potentially, hopefully the camera's picking this up well, that this is not going to apply in the same way that you might think with a standard paint. It's almost like a tinted clear coat. And that tint is iron metal that's just embedded in the paint. So we're just going to give this a little coat here. One thing that I learned in doing the first reverse bear trap that I did is if you try and get it smeared to the point where it's actually altering the color and trying to get the bear trap gray to match the color of the iron filing paint here, then it's going to look kind of splodgy. So really you want it to be thin layers as much as possible. Just kind of thin it out. We want the iron filings to be imbued within the primer, and that's about it. Then we're going to apply the oxidation to it in the form of the activator. But first what we're going to do is just 2 coats, nice thin coats of the iron paint here. And that's going to take a little while, but art is worth it. And this is going to look fantastic when it's all said and done. Now it is important that you fully let this paint completely dry between coats and before applying the activator. So this is, again, it's just going to take more and more time, but the patience will be rewarded. So far, all told, with the printing, the primer, the gluing, and so forth, this has been, up to this point, about a 4-day-long project. And I would not be surprised if between the painting and the activator and the protective coating, that this is going to wind up being another 2 days. Now it's going to be really tempting on the flat parts, like here. When we start doing it up here, it's going to be really tempting to want to really splodge this on, because it's just not going to look like you're doing a whole lot of anything aside from, like I said, like the tinted clear coat on top of the primer. But that's actually what you want. Between doing this nice and thin and having that clear coat of the iron filings in 2 distinct coatings, that's going to activate really, really well, and it's going to look amazing, especially now that we have, I really love the way that the airbrush looks with the brown primer on top of the black primer, and the way it's just really kind of letting the colors show through in layers like that. And I think that between the tint of the iron paint, the brown primer, the black primer, and the rust, once it actually gets activated, that this is going to look phenomenal. My only real fear at this point is whether or not the protectant coating is going to gloss it or darken it too much, but I think it's worth it. It's going to be necessary to have, so we'll just have to see. Now, because this is paint imbued with iron filings, they are heavy, they will sink, so it's kind of important to periodically, just every once in a while, give your source media a little bit of a stir, because the iron, you don't want the iron to settle in the bottom of your your reservoir too much. You want that to be on the brush as much as possible. Now this piece here is loose It's held in place with the bolts here. But what I'm going to wind up doing is once this is all complete and it's painted and so forth, then I'm just going to take a little twist tie and put it here between this little hoop and this little hoop and just kind of secure it in place. Otherwise it just kind of free floats there. But that's fine for when we're painting because it kind of gets it out of the way. Now if you have a good light source, that can be kind of critical because it allows you to kind of step back and look at the gloss shine. And if it looks like the shine is happening really kind of evenly, that's exactly what you want. If you notice something kind of standing out in terms of a smear or a smudge or a blotch, then you know that you can go ahead and take your brush and just kind of even that out a bit. Now, one thing I really love about the reverse bear trap and honestly making props and so forth from movies like Saw is imperfections really just lend to it. I mean, this is like rusty metal, dirty bathroom torture horror movies. So, we don't need to get things pristine. And if we make a mistake, then it's easy to just kind of incorporate that into the grimy, dirty aesthetic look of things. So when I was applying the brown primer, there were points in which I needed to thin out the airbrush. And I knew that because it was starting to kind of spit and do some, splotches here and there, which ordinarily I'd be a little, down on. Like you can kind of see, I don't know if the camera will pick this up, but you can kind of see right here, there is a little orange speck. And those specks are, typically not what an airbrush does when it's operating well. But in this case, I don't care. It's fine. It's just going to add to the aesthetic. It's just going to look grimy, splotchy, splattery. Splatter. That's the good word for it. Making horror props, if you have splatter, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just embrace the splatter. Two coats have been applied. It is now dry. The cog has been put back on. And this is ready for the paint to have its activation done. Now for this, the mask goes back on. Just reading the cautions on this, use with adequate ventilation and so forth. Anybody that was kind of considering just taking a risk on this one, it's not that this is the worst stuff in the world, but I have found that by using it, it's just kind of unpleasant. It puts, if you use it and you don't have respirator or ventilation, then you taste metal in the air. And if you get it on your hands, you can taste, like your hands smell like metal all day long. So Yeah, I highly recommend for this particular one, even if you want to take the safety stuff and toss it out the window, um, just wear your PPE because generally it's unpleasant. So I'm going to go ahead and mask up now and have a muffled voice, but here we go. So the way this works is you basically do a spray of it. You kind of just coat over top of the paint, and then you let it sit for about 5 minutes, and then you reapply, like immediately. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to do now. Here we go. Yeah, and even with the respirator, I can kind of smell, that kind of coppery blood, just metal. So, yeah, I'm glad I have the mask on right now. All right, so gonna let this set, get back to it in 5 minutes, reapply, and after that, it's basically just a waiting game because it can take a while for this to really kind of fully rust up, fully activate. But yeah, we're gonna let it do its thing, oxidize in the air, rust up that iron, and yeah, I'll see you on the second coat. I'll get back to you in 5 minutes. All right, 5 minutes are up. Second coat time. Here we go. There we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and see if I can do a time-lapse recording. We'll just have to see if that works out.
The rust effect is as far as it's going to ever go. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply the protectant coating, which is this stuff right here, Permacoat Extreme from Modern Masters Metal Effects. The first coat, they request or suggest that it be diluted 1-to-1 with water. I'm going to go ahead and do that, but as opposed to their instructions with the second coat being full strength, what I'm going to do is try that diluted first coat, just see how it looks as is, and then determine if I actually want to go with the full concentration protecting coat on the second round. So let's go ahead and give this a go. So I got my diluted mix right here, and last step of this whole thing. Here we go. Okay, now we will go ahead and let that completely coat, completely dry, and it'll dry clear. The real question is how much will it affect the actual finish. Let's go ahead and smooth that out there, just to be safe. And then really the last step will be just kind of determining whether I need those mouthpieces in. But that will be the fit and finish. And I mean, really, there's nothing to see there. So aside from the fact that I just sprayed the mouthpieces. Crap. I may have to reprint those. I'll be back.
And there we have it. The finished 225% reverse bear trap, fixing a lot of the mistakes that I made earlier. So just to kind of compare and contrast, here's the original. Not a big fan of the paint job on this one. I was until I made this one. This one, I swear, you could just set this on a platform, have somebody walk in the room, and they would not know this was made of plastic. This looks so authentic in its rusted metal feel to it. Plus, it's a good fit. So this is one where, if I go ahead and unclasp it and put it on, I did put mouthpieces down here at the bottom, just because it makes it so that I can kind of stabilize it. So once I have it in there like that, this is actually a really good fit. The headband is on my head, and the headband is on my head. I can stabilize it. So for wearing it on camera, I can actually make it look pretty good like that. And yeah, overall, I'm really happy with the look, the styling, the paint job, the sizing, all of that. I'm very happy with this one. The pins, I don't know. I might continue working on securing a little more. They're not really going to be going anywhere, I don't think. There's just a little bit of wobble to them, but that kind of makes sense considering that there's really only one small point on each one that's actually adhered to anything. I may take a chance and apply a little bit of adhesive on the underside of each one in here where it's not really going to be shown, but I don't know. If it's just a little wobble, but they're not actually pulling and moving away from anything, maybe I'll just leave well enough alone. Maybe only fix it when it breaks. But that's what I got so far. If you decide to follow suit and make your own, I would love to see pictures of it. Go ahead and tag me on Instagram, Rotted Entertainment. I'd love to see what you come up with. This was a fun little project. If you'd like to see me make any more props from movies and so forth, just let me know. I'd be happy to oblige. This is a fun little side project crafting experience for me. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and put this on and actually get in front of the camera and make that video that's going to be coming out later on this month on Routed Entertainment, all about Jigsaw. So look for that then. Thank you for joining me, and I will talk to you all soon. Take care.